everyone. So this is the 4 out of 8 videos for the science fair. You should have just wrapped up with creating the variable web and how to do that, how to come up with inspiration for your science fair topic, the different categories the science fair offers, as well as creating the variable web. So that's where I'm starting. I have a completed variable web. And I want you, if you have not completed a variable web, I want you to go back to the third video, and I want you to first complete the variable web before you begin this video, because I don't want you to work ahead to where you start getting lost. So again, I have completed the variable web, and I have used the example height of egg, amount of salt, and this is a density experiment where I put salt in water and I see how much salt it would take to create different heights of an egg. So that's a very, very, very basic experiment. And so I definitely don't want this experiment to be repeated. For a 7th grade level, I think that we can come up with a lot more complex experiments. But just to keep the explanation simple, that's why this is such a simple experiment. So again, we have officially created, okay, all right. So we have officially created our variable web. So now what we need to do is figure out what are our variables. Okay, so remember the dependent variable is what we're measuring. Okay, so we're going to do something in the experiment and then we're going to measure the effects of it. And that's the dependent variable. So for this example, our dependent variable is the height of the egg. Okay, that's our dV, and that's what we're measuring. We can measure this using the metric system, so I'm going to use centimeters. Okay, make sure that if you are doing anything with measurements that you are using the metric system for these science experiments. Then we have our dV or our IV. Our IV is what we are changing in the experiment. So if I am doing the height of egg experiment, I would be changing the amount of salt in each cup of water. And so my IV of salt, remember I'm going to want to use the metric system. So for my measurement, it might be milliliters. Okay, or maybe I'll measure it out using grams. Okay, so you just have to decide how you're going to measure it. And then everything else in your variable web is going to fall under constant. Those are the things that you're not going to want to change in the experiment. For example, if I have different amounts of salt but also different amounts of water, that's not going to be good for my experiment because I'm not going to know what actually affected the height of the egg. So everything else needs to be kept the same. And unlike our science fair unit, where you're used to just listing 3 or 4 constants, you want to list as many constants as possible that you can control in your experiment, and you want to legitimately keep them the same throughout. Lastly, we have our control. So our control is not on this variable web. It is listed below, but our control is no IV or the norm. So we're going to focus on this IV here. Right there, we're going to focus on that. And so no IV or the norm, what we're going to have to do is we're going to cross out that IV. So our no IV or our control would be the cup, no salt. Okay. Now I have my variables in my experiment. I can gather all the information that I need. So I'm going to erase all of this. Oh, okay, this is going to take a while, isn't it? Oh, look at that. Let's see. Okay. So now I'm going to scroll down. Okay. So I have my IV, whoops, IV, dV, constants, and again, list more than 4. Our control, so this is just where I'd write that down. Lastly, we have our question. So this is how to develop the question in your experiment, your overall question. So if you have taken my science classes, you know that I have a format for the question. And that's because when you follow this format, it's going to always make sure that it is specific, it is testable, and all the elements that you need in the question are in there. And that format is, how does the IV affect the DV? I'm going to erase these lines and I'm going to write, and I'll use like a different hand, or maybe I won't. Okay, I'll pretend I'm writing it. Okay, so how does the IV affect the DV? And all you do in my format is plug it in. Plug in the IV, plug in the DV. So the question for this example would be, okay, how does the amount of salt, which is our IV, affect the height of egg, which is the DV? Now, there are times where this doesn't make sense, or you need more information to have the question make sense. So, for example, maybe you want to say the height of egg in in 1 cup of water or something, or 1 liter of water or whatever. And also the starting with how might not make sense. Maybe you would need to start with why. But as long as you include the actual IV in the actual DV, regardless of additional information or formatting, and it ends with a question, make sure that it ends with a question, then your question is going to be specific, it's going to be testable. So you are good to go on that question. If you have any questions about how to write this, you of course can try to write it and then I can look over it before you move on. So once you move on, it is time for the research portion. This is definitely the most complex part of the experiment of the science fair project. It's the one that's going to probably take the most time aside from doing the actual experiment. So what you do is you go to the science fair Google Classroom, and the first thing I want you to do is I want you to look at this plagiarism portion of the science fair Google Classroom, so that you are not breaking any rules, because you do need to note that any plagiarism will be an automatic disqualification for science fair in the regional fair. So you will not be eligible to go to SEMO or to the award trip at the end of the year. For the 2018-2019, that's Six Flags, and I'm not sure for upcoming years what it will be. But you definitely want to make sure that that is not what happens, especially if you are able to stop it. So now we have to write our research paper. So there are 3 different tools that you can use to help write your research paper. Okay. So the first tool is just the research format. Okay. So I just want you to read this page, and then I want you to help develop those. I messed this up earlier. And then I want you to develop this. So first thing you want to do is brainstorm what you need to research in order to write an educated hypothesis. Make sure that you are reading the good example and bad example that is posted on Google Classroom so you have a good direction. So if I'm using my egg experiment, I'm going to brainstorm first. Okay, I need to know about why salt water makes things float. I need to know about density. I need to know the formula for density. Why does density and salt affect the height of an egg? And what is density? So for my formatting paper, I have my intro, supporting, and 3 supporting paragraphs, as well as a conclusion paragraph. It needs to be Times New Roman, size 12, double spaced, and 2-page minimum. And this is going to be strictly enforced, this 2-page minimum. So for my brainstorm, I decided that my 3 supporting paragraphs are going to be, what is density? My second supporting paragraph will be about how does salt water affect water's density? And my third supporting paragraph will be, what is the density of water, salt, and eggs? Okay, so I'm going to go to my reference sheet. Your reference sheet is going to be how you are going to create this, and how you're going to gather information. So in the next video, we're going to talk about how to gather information to develop your research paper.